I'm going to take a risk and stand out in front here. First off, I want to thank Rory Stewart for the fantastic invitation. When I received the invitation, I thought, I've heard that name before, and someone said, oh, he's the guy, The Places in Between guy. You know him, he wrote that book. And I thought anyone who walked across Afghanistan to write a book that I enjoyed reading was worth me hopping on a plane to come give a speech. So happy to come here for that, and thanks for such a great book. I also, as a recovering government official, enjoy the chance to speak about my work without the burden of being in office. So there's certainly a benefit to me to actually come and describe what we're doing in my words, not necessarily the words that I had to use last year, although they're pretty consistent. I'm pretty pleased with where the plan sits at this point and what progress we've made in our country. I thought I'd do a couple of things with the time that we have together. First off, I want to take a bit of a side tour and talk about why we did a plan. So why would we even write some beastly document like this? 367 pages of good, clean telecommunications fun. And you know, why would you even do this? So I'll spend a minute on that. I'd like to spend a minute on the state of the problem in the US. It's remarkably similar to the UK. And I certainly don't want to turn this into a commentary on the status of the special relationship or anything like that, but just know that as I looked at other countries during the course of our planning process, this is the one that's most similar. Our regulatory traditions rhyme. Even though we don't do everything the same, we're closer to each other than perhaps if I looked at Asian countries or some other places around the world. We also, I think, share a general belief that for the most part, industry is the appropriate mechanism to deliver broadband, although there are certainly areas where we're going to do some other things and be more creative and get more communities involved. So, but I do want to spend a minute just describing the US situation to all of you, because I'm assuming you don't spend your time reading up on US broadband policy. And then finally, I'll do a very quick tour of the plan. What are kind of the main parts of the plan, and they rhyme with many of the things that have been discussed here. And I'll zero in more narrowly on some of the rural issues, because I think that's what's most present here. So, you know, why do a plan? Why on earth would we do this? Why would I convince my family to move from Chicago to Washington to do this? You know, the theory behind the plan was that because in our country this is primarily a business activity, of companies making investment decisions and placing networks in certain places. Government has a role of a regulator, but it also can have a role of a convener. And it can be a force for good if it can organize an industry and give energy and activity to a set of policy goals that the country wants. And if the government can do that and remove the appropriate barriers, hopefully industry will invest appropriately and the whole thing kind of moves along. The model for this actually is, as Chairman Janikowski and myself and a fellow named Blair Levin, who were kind of the three-headed monster that sort of dreamt this thing up, as we discussed this, I was often making the point that this is very similar to the plan of Chicago, which is the city where I'm from. And many of you may not know about this, but our city burnt pretty much to the ground about 100 years ago. And instead of the government making a big action, all the local business leaders got together and commissioned a plan. It was called the Plan of Chicago. It turned out to be a landmark civic planning effort. And what was interesting about it is that not everything was implemented. You know, different ideas came and went. Things that were good ideas were done. There were a few things that were just bad ideas. They made it into the plan, but over time, people decided it was a lousy idea and moved on. Yet the end result, if you were ever to visit my town of Chicago, you would see this beautiful city that 100 years later has a certain logic to it that it did not have prior to the burning. So our intent is not to burn our broadband infrastructure and create a new plan. But yeah, but the point of the analogy is that the plan is a way to create energy and to create responses in lots of other people. There's certainly a role for government in our broadband ecosystem, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But the whole U.S. approach is primarily giving motion and motivation to both large companies like our telco providers, as well as smaller businesses like the ones that Susan's talking about. So with that, let me move on to just quickly describe the problem. What is kind of the state of the broadband in the US? And I'm going to use this table. I should have brought a lovely map, and I forgot. So this table is going to be US. Imagine the East Coast here, so Washington and New York and all of those places. This plant can be Texas. May I move your pigeon? Okay, thank you. This will make Chicago, which is sort of north in Texas and a tiny bit east, and Susan is sitting in California enjoying a lovely time at the beach and all of that. Most of our people live here and live in California. The Midwest, where I'm from, has a very large industrial base, so there's a lot of people here. The people on our coast refer to us as the Great Flyover. They rarely visit. But that's where I'm from. It's kind of the middle of the country. And then in between here, there are lots and lots of rural areas. In fact, driving around yesterday, I was remarking to my wife, it actually reminded me, and you'll find this surprising, a part of Northern California actually looks a lot like the hills that I drove through, where you see one house, and then you go over another hill and you see one house, very, very sparsely populated areas. So we face very similar problems that you all face in your broadband plan. In terms of competitors, if you live here on the East Coast or in one of the cities in the Midwest or on the West Coast, you have a choice of several providers. Verizon and AT&T are kind of our big telco providers. We also have a significant presence of the cable industry. So cable television, which you all have here, I don't know if you have as big of a footprint as we do. We deliver broadband through coax cables as part of the cable system. The cable system also covers about 85% of the country. So if you're in one of these places, you have quite a bit of choice. And in fact, you're increasingly having a choice of fiber to the home. So Verizon has made a substantial investment in fiber to the home technology, primarily in densely populated, wealthy areas. And if you were a Verizon shareholder, that's exactly what you would want them to do. Those are the best customers, that's where the highest margins are, and that's where their investment is. So that kind of gives you a quick lay of the land of what the situation is in the US. When the president started talking about broadband during the campaign, and when Chairman Janikowski convinced me to come and do this assignment with him, we started talking more and more about, what's in between. How do we make sure that, it's one thing to make sure that we have broadband in New York City, and that's really important, and there's certainly room to improve there. But we can't forget places like rural Michigan, which is up in our lake district, up in the Great Lakes, where, the densities are similar to here, and we don't want to forget the people in those places. So the plan really has three parts, and I'm going to just tour you through the three parts of the plan, and then happy to take questions or of any kind that you may have. It's a three-part plan because if you have two parts, you haven't done enough. And if you have more than that, it's sort of confusing and you really should just have three parts. So we decided to have a three-part plan. The first part of the plan is recognizing that in the US, the primary driver of broadband is private industry. Every year, our telecommunications companies invest about 40 billion US of capital investment in their networks. That's a large sum of money. It happens every year. The shareholders of those companies and the capital committees of those companies and the boards of those companies authorize those expenditures every year, and that's all designed to support those business models. As a government, it's really important to us that that continue, and that investment in those networks continue and be as unobstructed as possible, so that we do want to take a regulatory approach to those companies, but we also want to make sure that they have ways to deploy that capital appropriately. In addition, so part one of the plan is all about how do we make sure that 40 billion is optimized, and I'll go through it in specific in a second. The second part of the plan is recognizing that we still have about 14 million households that don't have access. So these are, in some respects, the places that I was describing before. And our view is consistent with, I think, what we heard this morning, is that there's really no business case to go to these places. We feel like the capital markets in the US are pretty efficient, despite the mess we created,